segregation, like the rollback of Reconstruction and being liberated from enslavement. And then, of course, going into right now, everything that we're going through, including gentrification. Gentrification is our starting point. But basically, this is a podcast that talks about Black folks interacting with cities. This is an inclusive podcast because I myself am a queer, non-binary, gender person from the South. We include everybody here. We listen to everybody, and that's part of why we have multiple ways you can watch this. We have 2 segments here at Defying Gentrification. So at the street corner, that is our hot topics section. You know how if you're out on the block, if you're out on the porch, if you're out on the corner, even at the water cooler, especially if it's about Black folks at your job, we're going to talk about stuff that's going on. And so this week, we're going to talk about, specifically, I pulled from Adam Mahoney's article on Capital B about the community at Turner Station, which is adjacent to the Francis Scott Key Bridge. It just crashed in the Baltimore region. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to go to what I like to call homeroom. We're going to school, and we're going to school to talk about what is gentrification. I want to set the stage. I want to set the definitions. I want to talk about my definition before we get into subsequent episodes where here in homeroom, we'll talk about how to defy gentrification. We're going to talk about why we're defying gentrification in the next episode, but we're going to touch on it a little bit here. And we're going to touch on why we want to eradicate gentrification a little bit, but then we're going to go deeper in that. And then later on this season, I'm going to walk you through my shoes. I'm calling it a diary of a gentrification defier. So we're going to go through my personal story here in homeroom, the homeroom section of this show. And we're going to have guests. We're going to have peers come, and we're going to have study hall here in homeroom as well. So, and if you want to be a guest, go ahead and email me, Kristen@theblackurbanist.com. And then finally, I want to go ahead and tease you about our Defying Gentrification Fellowship, which is our fan club here, starting at $10 a month for a whole year. If you can go ahead and just drop the whole $120, that'll give you an extra lecture each week that deep dives materials. Some of the materials that I reference here are actually, I'm going to be going to the Library of Congress and digging up for myself, but you'll have access to some of that, and you'll have access to me. We'll sit one-on-one and we'll talk about like what you need to defy gentrification, or if you are in a accomplice allyship mode, what you need to do to eradicate gentrification. So that's what we're going to do here. And so we're going to take an ad break. And when we get back from that ad break, I'm going to meet you at the street corner. This is Defying Gentrification with Kristen. Hey everybody. So were you aware that I have a whole bookstore? Probably not. And it's powered by Bookshop. In fact, let me show you the goodies of my Bookshop store. So yeah, Bookshop. So Bookshop started a few years ago to help people there's an alternative to that other site. But as you can see, you can get all your rebates. It sells everything. And if you really want to be awesome, you can support me, Kristen Jeffers Media. And this will help me produce Defying Gentrification, continue to upload the future of Black Urbanists, Chris Pattern, everything else. And anytime I do refer a book, you can come right over here. And yes, I am an official Bookshop affiliate, so anything you purchase on this site, especially if you purchase it in my bookstore, will go back to me. Now, you can purchase it everywhere, and there's also other bookstores, other local bookstores that you can support. But definitely, please consider supporting me and anytime I mention a book on the show going forward, please consider going to my bookshop.org. The link is bookshop.org/Kristen Jeffers, as you can see right there while I'm kind of lighting up the screen. And yeah, they don't have ebooks yet, but those are coming. Those are coming very soon. Anyway, thank you again for supporting all of my work, and happy reading. You're listening to the Defying Gentrification podcast. I'm Kristen Jeffers, and now we are at our street corner hot topics section of our podcast today. You could call it the street corner, call it the front porch. It's just the place where we talk. When we get real about talking. I did put a clean label on this podcast, so I won't say what I was about to say, but you know what I was about to say, that this is where we go to talk and talk. Sometimes we got sense and sometimes we ain't got sense. So first things first, I want to talk about and send all the love in the world to my family, friends, people who are like even more deeply affected by what just happened in Baltimore with the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. Even though this was an international news story, let me get you into the loop. So 1 week ago today, I'm recording this on Tuesday, April 2nd of 2024, at approximately 1:30 a.m. local time. A boat named the Dolly, a container ship, left a dock in the Patapsco River, part of the Port of Baltimore. Left the dock, and it hit a pillar of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is a steel frame bridge. There's concrete bridge span leading up to it, and then in the middle there's like a whole steel apparatus that carries traffic. It is a very large bridge, and all of it collapsed into the Patapsco River. All but a slither of it is still sitting the Patapsco River as of my recording time. Monday evening, April 1 of 2024, they were able to remove some of it, and they are in the process of working to open up a new, at least an access point to the port. But as of right now, the port, much of the operations of the Port of Baltimore, both on the Baltimore City and Baltimore County sides, are suspended. And people who are in Baltimore are going through just some shock. And so I wanted to pull up an article in particular this week from a publication called Capital B by Adam Mahoney. You can look him up at Adam A. Mahoney on Twitter, because it is Twitter for us. We are Black, it is still Twitter. And back to the seriousness here. Capital B is a wonderful nonprofit online newsletter. And they did kind of the overarching, how is this going to affect Black communities? Specifically, the community of Turner Station, which is adjacent to the span of the bridge on its northeastern side. The bridge basically kind of goes from southwest to northeast. It connects Baltimore County, which is adjacent to Baltimore City. Baltimore County surrounds Baltimore City, for those of you who are not familiar with our actual geography here in the region. And then it goes into Anne Arundel County, which is an adjacent county. It is a county that contains the capital of Maryland. Maryland only has a handful of counties. It's already a small state. It's already an oddly shaped state. We're already talking about the region and counties that are surrounding the Chesapeake Bay. The Patapsco River is an offshoot of the Patapsco Bay that's pretty large. It has a big depth to it. So we have been getting bigger and bigger ships now. There has been some controversy in addition to the fact that this Black community in the region has already been affected by being between two Superfund sites. In addition to that, those of you may know the name Turner Station because you have kept up and you've read the book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, or you watched the film that starred Oprah. So yeah, this is the same community. There's been a lot of toxicity, like literally the ground is toxic. People are ill. They're not just Henrietta Lacks, but many more people have had all kinds of illnesses. The community is 100 years old. There is a church there. That's what you're seeing on the screen. Those of you who are watching the video version of this podcast, the article itself, which I will include in the show notes so you can see this for yourself. The article leads with an image of people worshiping at a vigil that happened Tuesday night. March 26th. Of course, many folks there's been so much has come out of this story. Everything from the fact that, yes, we have a Black governor of Maryland. And we have a black mayor in the city of Baltimore, and also there's a black mayor in the District of Columbia, and all. Yeah, we have black leadership here. We have competent black leadership here. No, they are not perfect. And as someone who is a believer of abolition, I am not happy that they're still signing off on the $1 billion jail. But that is a hot topic for another episode. But I do want to highlight that it does suck that yet and again, this neighborhood, because of how adjacent to the bridge it is, homes shook. So we may have some property damage just from the collapsing of the bridge. People have been saying, oh, well, that particular bridge is 695. It's our beltway, and it only really exists to serve the port and the community of Turner Station and the community of Dundalk and some other Sparrows Point and adjacent communities. You know, we have it there because we need to drive hazardous materials that can't go into our 2 downtown tunnels. And on the Anne Arundel County side, there's a whole park and it's nice. So it's not that many people affected. And they were able to get most of the people off the bridge. So let me stop you right there. 8 people who are from immigrant communities who have families that are missing them. 8 people said goodbye to their families. Well, actually, technically 7 people, because there are 4 people that are still missing. 2 bodies were recovered. 1 man miraculously walked away from, like, collapsing from the bridge. And 1 other person, as of my taping, is in critical condition. But all these families have been affected. The communities, these are men who are from Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, countries in the Latina diaspora, and they're hurting. And once again, they're friends in surrounding communities. There are people right now who are out of work. They didn't go to bed on Monday night thinking that they wouldn't be going to work the next day. Some of them thought, some of them probably were getting ready to get up to go to work because, this is our warehouse community. We have like 24-hour shifts. People didn't realize it was going to be something like this. And of course, people love to joke on Baltimore. People love to say, oh, I watched The Wire, oh, X, Y, and Z, But I will tell you this, this podcast would not exist without the time I spent in Baltimore City in 2017 and 2018. In fact, I spend a lot of time there now. I have since driven up from DC to Baltimore and seen the bridge, and I couldn't help but cry. Yeah, it's a rough sight. It's a terrible sight. And I think for the first week, many of us were just in shock. And now I've seen some folks say that they've proceeded to the stage of grief that is anger. And I know many of you are like, yeah, why was this ship so big? Why was it so ragged? Why do we make so much stuff that we have to have bigger and bigger ships? Those are all valid questions. When you learn about the history of the bridge and how it took a decade to plan, how they talk about it being a tunnel, how they decided on it being a steel bridge. Yeah, that's a conversation to have. And I do want you to find a reputable engineer to have that conversation with. Don't just trust me now. I have my expertise, but I want to give credits to the engineers in our circles and communities that do especially our civil engineers. That is what they do. Civil engineers build bridges. And many of you are listeners, and I appreciate y'all. And I know y'all are hurting. Y'all are the folks thinking about this, watching that tape and thinking about the structural failures. Yeah. So there is a lot of pain. There's a lot of grief. And this is not the time to be claiming that people are incompetent to lead. All I have seen is impeccable leadership of the entities involved, anywhere from the president of the United States down to the mayor of Baltimore. Now, I do not agree with everything that they do. I want to make that clear right now. But right now, people are doing fairly well, and I love seeing how people are coming together. But I wanted to highlight specifically Turner Station and other Black communities of the Baltimore region who are already been going through it, redlining and ridicule and being underpaid. And if you are a Baltimorean and listening, I got you. I'll be up soon. I love y'all. I was back and forth this weekend. Y'all are great. And I hate to have to say that we're resilient because we get that enough as Black folks, but we do have a measure of that. So I am not sitting here in DC today just because I hate y'all completely. There were reasons I had to leave the first time, and there are reasons I'm looking to come back. And I know I want to just honor y'all right now and honor your work, your being, your memories of people. And I want to encourage everybody listening globally, one, to learn. If you live somewhere that is on water, like of course here in DC, we're not completely out of the boat, but our bridges, we're not a port town in the same way that Baltimore is. But those of you all living in port towns, those of you who have steel bridges, those of you who are vulnerable to water, one of the things that I'm going to be doing to take action after this, something that I've been kind of nudged to do, is to take swimming lessons, proper swimming lessons. My dad helped me learn how to kick years ago, but of course, wearing glasses and being scared of my lady parts, I wasn't like swimming the way I could. And of course, I can't really see without my glasses. And I have used contacts before, but I'm going to look into that again. I'm going to look into swimming lessons. I'm going to also look into getting things like a seatbelt cutter and things of that nature, because I've also seen stories of people being stuck in Rock Creek here in DC, which is not even as deep. There's a lot to learn from this, and there's a lot to sit with this. And so I want to just start my very first episode. As I thought about this podcast and started planning this, that this would be my first hot topic on the street corner. But I do want to say that our people deserve more and better, and I want to honor that. So with that, as I promised, we not only do we take time to sit at the street corner and talk about things, we go to school here. And so after the ad break, I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about what is gentrification, because this is relevant. At least a couple of you, when I highlighted that Canton Crossing in Baltimore, different part on the other side of the Patapsco, is an example, or at least it's something that can trigger thoughts of gentrification. Let me be clear, it can trigger thoughts of gentrification, even though there was no displacement involved. Thinking about Turner Station, thinking about it being a contaminated site, thinking about going to Canton Crossing and that it was on also a brown field. Yeah, we may be able to reuse some of this stuff, but our health quality, that matters. And being pushed into certain neighborhoods with bad health quality, and certain part, like nobody is actually, there are apartments in that region of Canton Crossing, but I don't think they're on the brown field. But then again, in Baltimore City, everybody is exposed to like environmental stuff. So let me take my little break here, and we will come back and we will talk about what is gentrification. As I teased before, WTF is gentrification. What is it really? And by the time we get done with this, you will understand. You will truly understand why we are defying and needing to eradicate it. We'll be back in just a moment. Once again, this is Defying Gentrification podcast with Kristen Jeffers. Hey, seriously, I know in the last ad break, I was like, well, you don't have to shop at Bookshop and you don't have to shop at my store, but it would be nice if you did. Because honestly, I have to tell you, like, I have curated this wonderful list of books for you. And if you're listening to that first session, you're like, okay, I wonder what we're going to do in the next section. She says we're going to define gentrification. Well, guess what? You could go ahead and you could pause this tape right now and do all of your homework if you go over to the store and you shop for me. Like, basically, you can go to bookshop.com/Kristen Jeffers Media, And right here, my smiling face, and then of course my infamous picture. I in episode 2 I will talk about this picture, but this is the picture I'm talking about in episode 2. But yes, all these books, some of them are fiction and some of them are just fun. Like One Last Stop is just fun. I adore this story. It is sci-fi, but it's not dystopian sci-fi. But of course, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, a little too real these days. So read them and like learn. And then of course, not only do I have the Black Queer Feminist Urbanist book list listed here, you can check out Black Urbanist book list, which has books like The Great Society Subway. And if you want to join me in Crafty Fun, I have a crisp pattern, crafty DIY, and design inspirations list as well. So you can join me. It's bookshop.org/Kristen Jeffers. And if you shop there, I am an affiliate and I will get a little bit of that money back, and you'll support this podcast and support everything else. And you'll know what you need to know to be successful with your reading and understanding of gentrification. Now, back to the show. And we are back to Defying Gentrification podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Jeffers. I'm also your producer of this podcast. It's just me here, and I am taking my expertise over 14 years of paying attention to urban planning as a Black queer feminist urbanist from North Carolina, and living in the DMV, going back and forth between DC and Baltimore, and I'm applying that wisdom and interest here to this podcast. So for the longest time, because I wanna be real with y'all. For the longest time, I was hoping that I was wrong about what gentrification was. And you'll understand that when I get to the end of the definitions. But let me just show you the definitions, read them for you, and we'll talk about why now I realize that I wasn't completely off base when we talk about the concept of gentrification. It is deeply problematic, and the conceptualization of it is even problematic. So let's start with the basic definition. So good old Wikipedia, which tries to be unbiased, which is a collaborative project, but as we know, and as we've learned in formal schooling, we don't start with Wikipedia for reasons, because oftentimes Wikipedia tries to be right, but it isn't always right. But in this case, this is pretty simple, and the next definition is going to come from a dictionary. But gentrification for Wikipedia distills down to 3 words: urban, socioeconomic, process. So we go into the dictionary on the next slide, on the next definition here. But this is kind of the simplified thing. So, but socioeconomic process could happen anywhere. Urban, that part, yeah, anything can be urbanized. Yes, even as someone who came from rural areas, I've watched fields become urbanized and suburbanized. So anything can be urbanized, and the idea that something needs to be urbanized often is there well before the field has been turned over into the urbanization that it is. So, okay, that's our basic definition. Doesn't seem bad. It's just it's a process. It's a thing that happens. It's economic, and it's social. Let's hold on to that as we go through our definitions, because this is a social process. Okay. So our next definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, which I accessed via Google. Basically, gentrification is the process whereby the character of a poor urban area is changed by wealthier people moving in, improving housing, and attracting new businesses, typically displacing current inhabitants in the process. That's the first definition. The second definition, and I believe that this definition has come about because of the popular usage of things, more of the cultural things being gentrified. So An area undergoing rapid gentrification, the process of making someone or something more refined, polite, or respectable. The example is soccer has undergone gentrification. So that second definition is the one that for the longest time I definitely didn't want to really like deal with. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to just keep it in a urban planning, like I just wanted to keep it as an economic process having to do with urban areas. But that socio process part of that previous definition, you have to sit with. And then, oh my gosh, definition number one. So, character, poor, improving housing, attracting new businesses, displacing inhabitants. So that's kind of like the dictionary, of course, is very straightforward. This describes what happens. The dictionary isn't necessarily going to have a value judgment. And FYI, for folks who aren't aware of how things get into the dictionary, it takes years sometimes for things to get into the dictionary. You may hear on the news when people have problems and have complaints about certain terms and things moving into the dictionary that weren't there before. Part of the reason people struggle with that process is that, we may not get the nuance right. The nuance might not be there. But as someone who has studied this topic, both as a public administration, public affairs student, as well as someone who is a journalist and someone who keeps up with this and who I read articles all day, every day, news articles and even journal articles that like dig into this. And speaking of a journal article, we're going to move into talking about the person who actually created the word. And that person's name is Ruth Glass. Ruth Glass was born in Berlin, moved to briefly studied in New York at Columbia University in their sociology department, came back to Britain and focused more on urban planning, and ultimately ended up becoming a top scholar at the University College of London. She wrote a book, and the book is what is summarized here. She actually wrote a book that contained the word gentrification. The book is called London's Newcomers, the West Indian Migrants. Even though we pinpoint the word gentrification to 1964, she did that in another paperwork, she actually had been studying as part of the Center for Urban Studies, which she ran in London. She had been studying the neighborhoods of London. She had been studying how what we would call now a Caribbean, mostly Afro-Caribbean people, but what they termed in Britain West Indian people, because of course Britain also was colonizing India at the time. So India was considered East India, and then you had West India, which was the Caribbean, and some of the other parts of the Americas that were underneath the British Commonwealth. So that is the context that we're talking about. And basically, Islington was in the 17th century was this high-end neighborhood, wealthy neighborhood, mostly white English people. I'm assuming Anglo-Saxon. Okay, you have a Black neighborhood of Black Caribbean people, Afro-Caribbean people. They're coming to Britain during this period of time after World War II. Even though people on those islands were not considered citizens before they had the opportunity to maybe become citizens, there was still some like roughness there. Those of you who are Londoners who know about the Windrush generation and who are descendants of the Windrush generation, please feel free to reach out to me and send resources or point me to resources. I'm happy to read them out and share them in the fellowship and in future episodes. But yeah, basically, Ruth Glass was a German British woman, white woman, who is a scholar of urban planning, was given the money and time to go and do sociological and anthropological studies of Afro-Caribbean people, termed as West Indian, as was the most preferred term back then. Now, some people still use the terminology West Indian. Let me know in the comments or reaching out to me if that's how you refer to yourself or your family refers to yourself. If you're Afro descendant via the Caribbean, much like I'm Afro descendant, but I'm via North Carolina and the Mid Atlantic region. Um, tell me what y'all call yourselves, and also tell me like if you have family members and friends, like what was it like to just experience this? One of the reasons, those of you who have known my previous work, one of the reasons I wanted to like create something that's broadly called Defying Gentrification is that I wanted to start having these bigger global conversations. I was on another podcast that's just now released to the world. Depending on when you listen to this, it may already be out, and I may be able to include it in the show notes. If it's in the show notes, it's out in the world. And one of another, a Black woman that was interviewing me challenged me to, spread out around the world. And I had to say, my worldview was very shaped by the United States as it is, because part of the colonial project of being in the United States is that we are told that we're the best. And part of the British colonial project was everybody should want to be in the UK. And so you have people coming to the UK, you have them coming to a neighborhood that have fallen out of favor. So one factor that many researchers since this point, including Ruth Glass, have found is that oftentimes if a building type is deemed obsolete, is sometimes it'll sit vacant, it'll sit abandoned, or because these are unwanted homes to the most wealthy, and generally because of colonial dynamics, especially in other nations, and of course a little bit in our major cities of the United States, especially thanks to things like redlining, even though you may not necessarily see it, especially in, say, a city like Philadelphia or Baltimore, where the housing typology is almost the same, but you do see it in how inner cities with their row houses and their smaller houses and their older appliances and their older furniture, even because sometimes, some of the older homes will come with built-in furniture, and, people don't necessarily want that. And of course, we have an industry that builds on driving until you qualify, get a car, drive further out, get a newer and bigger house, revamp your house every few years. Now, of course, that is changing because the prices are kind of going out and away from what people can afford. And birth rates in certain communities, specifically white communities, have reduced, whereas birth rates in Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color communities have grown, as well as like birth rates are still growing in working class and lower middle class white communities in the States. So basically, we got the word gentrification because of that. And let me I'm going to move ahead and talk about really solidify this definition. So Sharon Zukin, in 2014, which was the 50th anniversary of the word gentrification, Sharon Zukin is a professor at at the time was at the City University of New York, and had been studying gentrification themselves for several years, and had watched the evolutions when we have more conversations around displacement. And I am going to zoom ahead here. If you want to reference a lot of what I'm talking about today, I'm including in the show notes a Curbed article from 2014 called As Gentrification Turns 50, Tracing This Nebulous History. And so that is my reference article here for this particular segment. But I welcome you, not even if you don't join us in the fan club, to do the digging and learn more about not only what gentrification looked like to Ruth Glass for her to create this terminology, but also what it does look like and how it does show up. It may show up as urban renewal. It may show up as displacement. It may show up as cultural change. Of course, I actually do live in Washington, D.C. proper now, and we've been through that change and the battle with Go-Go. Of course, Go-Go City is a wonderful documentary that just came out. Chocolate City. There's two Chocolate Cities books. Both of them are worth reading to learn more about Black migrations and gentrifications. And of course, the work of Dr. Natalie Hopkinson, who calls herself Dr. Go-Go. Look her up. She is on the site formerly known as Twitter, and she has a lot of wonderful insight and has a book of her own called Go-Go City that chronicles how sites of go-go music were basically erased. So if you're coming into I might be the only person that came to DC in the year 2016 expecting go-go venues to still be operating, multiple go-go entities, and being disappointed that really, other than the Metro PCS, like on the 7th, and you and Florida and Georgia, that whole corner where everything kind of changes, that a lot of other things have been changing. And of course, living here through those changes, and even writing an article for the publication Greater Washington, which I have served as a contributing editor for. And at this point, you're listening to this podcast, I may have moved on from, but have been. I believe it was in 2017, 2018, I wrote an article saying from my first time living in DC that living in DC wasn't that bad, and gentrification wasn't that bad. And, it seemed like we were resilient. Now, next couple of episodes of this podcast, I'm going to talk about how we can be that resilient, how we can defy and eradicate. But let me pause there, because the reality and what has gotten me saying not just defy gentrification, because I would defy gentrification, because gentrification was something that was done to people like me. That is why I say defy. Eradicate is the call to action for folks who need to eradicate. But let me read this definition for those of y'all who are listening to this episode. They are people with cultural capital, artists, writers, teachers, professors, etc. And Ruth Glass's words, if you read the Curbed article, were like the middle class intelligentista. By the 1950s and early 60s, that group of people begins to appreciate the urban environment in a way that other middle class people do not. The old houses, the crowded streets, the social diversity. Let's pause on that one. Social diversity. Who is the diversity here? The chance to be bohemian, and also to be around lower class people of all different backgrounds. The very factors that are driving a more mainstream middle class out of cities. So this is Sharon Zuckton describing what Ruth Glass was talking about. And in many ways, it just zeroes into me that you don't have gentrification if you don't have some people being deemed lower class and other people being deemed upper class. We're talking about Britain that has a monarchy and a landed gentry. Those of you who are into Bridgerton and Pride and Prejudice and all that. Now, Bridgerton tries to clean up, oh, well, we could have owned land in Britain, and, things are nice and everything's pretty. But the reality is, with that, just like we're having this conversation around Cowboy Carter and Beyonce's imagery on her album cover, as much as we want to try to reclaim certain things aren't ours to reclaim. Certain things just have to go. Yeah, we can bop, we can dance in a floofy dress, we can have the party of the season, we can have garden parties, but basically gentrification, and the Curbed article really goes into the chronology. First, it was just, okay, in many places, artists, writers, and teachers, professors. But who's to say that the residents of Islington weren't already artists, writers, and teachers? The Black residents of Islington weren't already artists, writers, and teachers. So here we are pitting artists together based on the color of their skin, partly because gentrification is an economic factor before it's a social factor. The economic factor comes into play when you have those who actually own the property, because that's the other thing. Islington, some of Islington was rental property, some of it was in the possession of those who were of landed and who had titles. Yes, in Britain you can become knighted for like your cultural product, but you also become knighted or be given land or be part of the greater like order, the British Empire, from having land and just being a person that's had land forever. That's a reality, that's a real thing. And so basically, when I read this definition, especially when I hear lower class people of all different backgrounds, other middle class people, old houses, and being bohemian, what does that really mean? Like, what does it mean to, who are we basing being bohemian against? Why are we assuming that the people that were there weren't already there? And now let me make it clear. Not some of these people wanted to be in community with each other. However, what has happened over the course of all time is that racism, anti-blackness has been present at all of this at all times. In the States, we are on stolen land. In the British Empire, it is also land taken by force. And so you have the minor version of this with gentrification. You had this concept that only certain people are wealthy and only certain people are worthy. And I 100% believe that I'm just worthy by being born. It shouldn't be a thing where, yes, there's a lot to talk about digging into basic economics, but it shouldn't be a thing of, okay, we got to get rid of Black music stores. We got to get rid of Black culture just because we're moving in next door. So one thing I will tell you that has influenced me, and why I say defy gentrification is because it's happening to me right now. So as I've said, I live in DC, and yeah, we deserve better because we can get better. I currently am recording this podcast sitting in a building that is 50-50 people who need housing assistance and people who are paying the market rate. This is a pretty quiet building. There's all kinds of people here. And I feel like because there is an economic control, there is a agreement that we're going to share space. Gentrification is not happening in the same way as it does in other buildings because the district government, the property manager, the landowner, the landlord has agreed to take rents at different levels. And in fact, half the apartments in this building, including our own, have some sort of discounted rate. And our rates are discounted based on what our actual income is. So, yes, as of this recording, my partner and I have had a good year. We're in preferred jobs, and there's just so many layers to that, but we'll get into that as we go through the episodes. And of course, she's going to eventually be a guest on the podcast, and we'll talk about this as well. We deserve better than just, oh, well, your body isn't worthy, so your body, we're going to move you away. And so what we have seen over the years is, yes, first it was artists and it was collaborative working, but then it was, oh, well, we don't like this art, but we like this house again. And then it was, we value this historical value, and oh, we can pay more for it. And so, it's become a capitalistic enterprise because, of course, housing is not a human right. Housing is a capitalistic enterprise. And so, yes, I know that is something that to sit with and unpack is going to take a while. And that is why we have started a podcast, folks. And that is why we take our time, a little bit of time in homeroom. I'm not going to spend hours on this, but I will say that I do want us, as I come to the end of this episode, why do we eradicate gentrification? It is racist and colonial. So if you want to go on this journey with me, we will be pro-Black, anti-racist, anti-people being pitted against each other in that way. But we are not going to sit here and act like human beings aren't worthy, like just for being human beings. And we're not going to be colonial. We're not going to be colonizers here. We're going to be all looking internally because, of course, colonized people have developed internalized biases, racisms, classisms, colorisms, eugenic, ableisms, all the isms. We're going to be like unpacking that here. And as I have teased, I have a Defying Gentrification fellowship that is purpose for sitting with these concepts. If you're listening to this podcast and you're a little rumbly, but you want to keep working with me and others to think about how to defy and eradicate gentrification, we'd love to have you. The link is in the show notes, as well as the link is on the show page. You go over there. It's powered by Podia. Is a $120 course, and on Mondays we have an extra lecture where I go even deeper. But right here, right now, what we're doing here on the Defying Gentrification podcast is to give you all a taste. And so this is probably going to be the most luxury. These first few episodes are going to be probably the most luxury versions of this podcast. In the future, we're going to be talking to people in our homeroom section. And we also may have some special guests come on at some special guests may come on for Street Corner. We might talk about current events of the day, and then we might talk about our main topic, or talk about the work that they're doing, or talk about living in the world, and talking about, your first home and your first car and riding metro for the first time. And if you've had stories of like land loss and, you know, home loss and evictions and all of that. And really, as I've said in the trailer, I want this to feel like home. I want you to feel like I'm a friend, that you're not alone. And so I want to end this episode to say, if this is some of our episodes, I'm going to try to trigger warning, because some of them may trigger thoughts and feelings. But other episodes, like next episode, we're going to talk about what I do to defy gentrification. So definitely come back and keep going. Actually, if you're listening in real time, that episode is already in your podcast player when we launch, so you can totally listen to it. Or if you listen to this one and you need the palate cleanse a little bit, or by the time we have more episodes, we'll have other episodes that'll be a little bit more happy, other episodes will be a little bit more sad. And we do have this community where you can come and process and spend time with us on Mondays with Q&A, as well as everybody that signs up in the next few months will get one-on-one time with me. That may change as we get more people. If a bunch of y'all are interested, I may have to spread that out. I may have to change how we do that. But those of you who really want to like sit with me and figure out how to defy gentrification and eradicate gentrification, I would join the fellowship now, so that way you have priority when as our community grows, and maybe even opportunities to become trainers yourself. So this is going to be a community. This podcast is an educational place. It's something to listen to while you're going about your day and helping you understand these concepts. Because yes, absolutely, we can defy and eradicate gentrification. And I'm looking forward to having you on this journey with me and hearing your stories, hearing from designers, fellow designers, as well as just community makers, doers, making our communities better and making our communities so that everybody is worthy and everybody gets a chance to thrive on Earth, because we only have one Earth. Only got one Earth, y'all. Natural disasters, shipping, accidents like we've had this time period. We only got one Earth, so we need to be able to like communicate and honor each other on that Earth. So as we go out today, I want to thank you all for listening. Defying Gentrification is a publication of Kristen Jeffers Media, which is my umbrella media company. It is home to the Black Urbanist, my legacy blog on urban planning. It is home to Chris Pattern, my blog on crafting. So feel free to go over to theblackurbanist.com and read my archives. Know that my views have changed and they may seem a little different, but if you want to read my Black Queer Feminist Urbanist Manifesto, it lives over at theblackurbanist.com. And if you want to see some of my artwork, my fiber artwork, go to chrispattern.com or follow me at Chris Pattern. But you can also follow me at Black Urbanist on Instagram to get updates on this podcast. And the site formerly known as Twitter, you can always get updates there. Get sound bites, share how you feel. Do share this podcast. Do rate and review it whenever you're listening to this. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you have a wonderful time. And know that you can and we will defy and eradicate gentrification. Until next time, y'all. This has been Kristen Jeffers and Defying Gentrification.